Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's disability information video. This week we're going to be discussing the topic of intellectual disabilities. So before I describe exactly what an intellectual disability means, I want to give a bit of background on exactly what intelligence means, because I think most people kind of think of intelligence in a very intuitive way. It's kind of like they know it when they see it, but they don't necessarily know how to articulate exactly what intelligence is. So I wanted to give a bit of background about how intelligence is thought of from the psychological perspective. So in general, most would agree that intelligence involves the ability to learn from experience and adapt to, shape, and select environments. So it's something like a capacity to become competent and learn in whatever environment you are faced with. So basically, the idea is that those who are more intelligent tend to learn and adapt quicker than those who are less intelligent. So what's important to kind of recognize here, and something that I think is perhaps overlooked a lot of the time, is that intelligence is really a lot about the speed of processing. A lot of people think that intelligence is more about the capacity to grasp these complex ideas. Being really good at math or something. And that is definitely a part of intelligence, but a big part of intelligence that I think is overlooked a lot is that it's really about the speed of processing, the speed at which you grasp information, the speed at which you learn. So someone who is more intelligent is just quicker at learning ideas than someone who is less intelligent. That's sort of the central idea. And now that's a bit of background on what it means. And I also wanted to acknowledge that there is a bit of disagreement in the world of psychology about intelligence and exactly what intelligence is. So some argue, sort of in line with what I've just described to you, that intelligence should be thought of as one all-encompassing trait that affects all areas in life. So the idea is that the thing that makes you good at learning one thing also makes you good at learning other things. So intelligence under that definition is just one thing, and someone who's more intelligent will basically be better at learning all areas of life than someone who is not intelligent. So that's one perspective, and I would say that that's the dominant perspective in psychology right now. However, there is another perspective. Well, there are several other perspectives, but another dominant perspective is that the idea that intelligence is not one trait. It's actually multiple things so it's multiple traits that vary between individuals. So basically the idea is that the skill that makes you good at learning math is different from the skill that might make you good at learning a sport. So there's multiple different intelligences that someone can have at different levels. So someone can be good at learning sports, but maybe not be so good at learning math. That's the idea behind multiple intelligences. So I'm just going to acknowledge that there are these differing perspectives out there, but I can't get too deep into them in such a short video. And I want to acknowledge that intelligence was one of the most widely researched topics in all of psychology. So I'm not going to cover everything in this video. And because of that, I've linked in the description to this video an article describing different theories on intelligence in case someone from the audience wants to learn more. Because intelligence it's a really interesting construct, and I think it's worth putting a bit of time into learning about. So now, moving on, basically what I want to articulate to the people here is that the first theory on intelligence, which is the idea that intelligence is one trait that affects all areas of an individual's life, that perspective is the perspective that is most dominant in psychology, and it is the perspective that has led to the development of IQ tests, which attempt to quantify intelligence in relation to other people of your age group. So what I want to convey is that an IQ score is different from other test scores that you've probably received in your life. When you take a math test, you usually get a score at the end saying, like 86, 76, 100%, it basically tells you how many questions you got wrong on the test, and the score you get is based on that. But it doesn't work the same way for an intelligence test. An intelligence test, the score you get is determined relative to other people in your age group. So the way they've defined it in psychology is that 100 IQ means that you have an average level of intelligence relative to other people in your age group. But that doesn't mean that everyone with 100 IQ has the same level of intelligence. For example, someone who's a toddler with 100 IQ would be completely different from someone who's an adult who has 100 IQ. So the toddler with 100 IQ is an average toddler, but they're much less intelligent than the person who has 100 IQ and is an adult, because the adult is an adult. They know more than the toddler. So, basically what I'm trying to say is that that IQ is measured relative to other people in your age group. And so, as I mentioned, 100 IQ is about average. And above around 150 IQ is considered to be fairly above average, and scores around 85 IQ or below are considered to be fairly below average. And around 68% of the general population will fall somewhere between those scores. So 68% of the population falls between 85 IQ and 115 IQ. So that's around average. And the rest of the population falls above or below that range. So now that we've discussed a bit about intelligence and IQ tests, what I also want to mention is that clinical psychology has adopted the dominant view that I've been discussing in psychology, which is that intelligence is one all-encompassing trait. So because of this, IQ tests have become a very widely used diagnostic tool in psychology to help diagnose certain disorders, such as intellectual disabilities. So now that I've discussed what intelligence is, I'm going to discuss exactly what an intellectual disability is. So an intellectual disability basically refers to problems with general mental abilities, so problems with intelligence, that affect functioning in two main areas. So first is intellectual functioning, and second is adaptive functioning. So I'll talk about each of these in turn. So intellectual functioning refers to things like learning, problem solving, and judgment. And basically the way clinicians might diagnose a disorder in this area of an intellectual disability is through an IQ test. So an IQ score of around 70 to 75 would indicate a significant limitation in intellectual functioning. Remember that scores beneath 85 are already considered below average, so 75 and below is significantly below average. IQ scores are used as a tool for measuring intellectual functioning. But what's important to recognize is that clinicians interpret these scores in the context of a person's general mental abilities. So it's not necessarily the case that there's like a cutoff score where beneath it you have an intellectual disability. The clinician exercises a bit of judgment, but the IQ test is sort of used as an indicator or a tool to tell the clinician sort of how the person ranks on the IQ test relative to the general population. But that score is taken in the context of the clinician's sort of overall interpretation of the person's intellectual functioning. And now the second area of intellectual disabilities, or the diagnosis of an intellectual disability, is adaptive functioning. So adaptive functioning refers to the activities of daily life, such as communication and independent living. So the three core areas that are assessed are the conceptual adaptive functioning, so things like language, reading, writing, math, reasoning, knowledge, and memory. So these are the cognitive skills that are used in day-to-day life. And there's another area is social functioning. So things like empathy, social judgment, communication skills, the ability to follow rules, and also the ability to make and keep friendships. So this is another core area of adaptive functioning that would be assessed for someone with an intellectual disability. And then the third area would be practical. So this would be things like independence in areas such as personal care, job responsibilities, managing money, recreation, and organizing school and work tasks. So just being able to stay on top of the practical things you need to do in day-to-day life. So the conceptual, social, and practical aspects of life are all considered to kind of make up adaptive functioning. And so, and as I mentioned, this intellectual functioning, which is largely assessed through IQ tests and the assessment of general mental abilities, plus adaptive functioning, which is assessed through the person's conceptual, social, and practical abilities, those are what make up the diagnosis of an intellectual disability. So, and now to wrap up here, I want to acknowledge that intellectual disabilities exist on a spectrum. So they can range from mild, where the person may be able to function independently, but they simply have a more difficult time learning things and adapting to new situations. So in this case, they may still become productive and independent members of society. However, they just don't have the speed of processing to kind of really grasp more complex tasks. So in general, they can become, people with mild intellectual disabilities can become independent. It's just they're still unable to grasp more complex cognitive tasks. And now someone with moderate intellectual disabilities may require supervision, but can generally function day to day and relatively independently. And finally, someone with a severe intellectual disability basically means that the person's daily living is severely impacted, meaning that they may require 24/7 support from caregivers, and they will likely be unable to communicate effectively, unable to perform basic self-care, and which basically means that they cannot live independently. So another thing that's, I think, important to keep in mind is that the severity of intellectual disabilities, it's not a complete even dispersion. So it's more common for people to have mild intellectual disabilities. So this would be IQ scores around 50 to 70 approximately, and it's sort of the category of people who, might not be able to grasp the more complex cognitive task, but they can still function independently and as members of society. So it's not like an intellectual disability always completely prevents someone from functioning in society. It can just sometimes be a limitation at times. So I think that covers kind of the core bases of what intelligence means and what it means to have an intellectual disability. So at this point, I think we now can move on into the next portion of our video, which will be an interview with someone with lived experience.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian. I'm gonna take over from Oliver for this segment. And today we have a very special guest here with us, Earl. And I know Earl for a long, long time. Probably one of the first participants of RCD that I came to know. And we've been through many projects and programs together. And one of the highlights that I remember was the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And Earl, can you briefly remind me, what award did you receive for the Duke of Edinburgh?
I received the Bronze Award.
The Bronze Award. Okay, fantastic. There was a lot involved in the Duke of Edinburgh Award, mainly all the write-ups, all the work experience, and all the adventurous journeys that we went through. So today in this topic, we're going to talk about intellectual disability. So Oliver covered the basics of this disability, and right now we're gonna interview Earl for his lived experience. So Earl, my first question to you is, how does an intellectual disability affect your life?
Because I'm a slow learner, and I don't get what people say to me sometimes, and that's why I learn a bit slower than other people, because I'm not as good to communicate with other people because I'm a slow learner and I don't get what the other people say to me, because
So basically communication.
Yeah, communication.
It's somewhat tough for you.
Tough for me.
Okay. Now, so growing up in our typical school system, how did you find school? Were the classes rather difficult for you?
The class was difficult for me because I don't understand the question. The teacher teach me.
Right,
And
is this like all across the different subjects of the school?
Yeah, the different subjects.
Okay. So so naturally this can create a problem in both your learning and your career path, for example. So getting the right grades for, let's say, university was out of the question.
Yeah.
But that didn't stop you from going on to further education. Which school did you go after high school?
Went to Cortland University.
Okay, and how did they prepare you for what's to come?
Went out to work experience.
Okay, so
to try to get a job.
Okay. So in Quanlin, you mainly focus on like work experience, and that's how they prep you for your future career path. Okay, excellent. So you also mentioned from off the camera that you like to use, like I know that you're going to work right now, and things that keeps you in check, like reminds you to go to work, you use a cell phone, is that correct?
Yeah, I use a cell phone to copy all my schedule down.
Okay, so you have your schedule on your cell phone. So electronics basically help me keep you focused
to go to work.
Okay, on your shift.
Oh, my shift.
Right now, you work full time, is that right?
Oh no, I work part time.
Part time, okay, part time. And what type of work do you do?
Grocery store.
Grocery store. So
stock and shelf.
Very much needed during this time, especially during the pandemic. Everybody's buying groceries now. Awesome. So, between the communication and, getting the grades for further education, these are all the difficult parts of your life. All right. Yeah. So, but nonetheless, you got through that and you have part-time job and you are using your cell phone to basically remind yourself on which shift to go to, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Do that.
Excellent. Now, my second question for you, Earl, is what are some of the ways for you to manage your disability? So how do you, we probably touch a little bit on that. So how do you deal with things like, I may forget about this, I may not understand this. Like who do you go to? Who do you talk to? What do you do about that?
I talk to my parents about that and my supervisor about that.
Okay, so it's job related.
Yeah, job related.
You talk to your supervisor?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't quite understand. Can you explain this? So basically you need further information.
Further information on how to do stuff.
Okay. And for stuff that comes up at home, you talk to your parents
about that.
Okay, very good. Now, are there other stuff that you make use of? You mentioned about cell phones.
Yeah.
Do you also work on a computer just to make your day-to-day?
Yeah, I play on my computer.
Okay, and how does that help you in your life? Like, do you email other people? Like, do you call other people?
I email other people.
Okay, and is that easier than using a phone?
Yeah, much easier than using a cell phone.
Okay, so does that mean when you talk on the phone, it gets harder for you?
Talking on cell phone is a little bit harder to understand what the other people are saying.
Oh, I see. So email also probably, for me at least, allows me to think of the words more carefully, and I can type the right words. And the real-time conversation is always difficult, right? Yeah. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I feel the same way too.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's talk about a fun thing. What kind of things makes your day? Like, what makes you happy?
I go to work.
You go to work. You're happy going to work.
Yeah.
Ooh, fantastic.
I play basketball.
Okay, and sports too?
Yeah, sports too.
Oh, okay. Wait, let's go back to work. So, why do you say that you feel happy going to work? Most people may not say the same, but tell me about that.
Because you can work with the other co-workers and make friends.
Okay, so you enjoy that interaction
with other people.
With other people. Do you like having a conversation with them?
Yeah,
Do you like to learn more about them? What they do?
I like to have conversation and learn more about them.
Okay, very cool. And then you mentioned about sports.
Yeah.
You right now you play
Yeah,
basketball.
Olympic basketball.
Special Olympics
Yeah,
basketball.
Yeah,
Okay. And are you still currently part of that team?
yeah. Give
When was the last time you played a match?
last year.
Last year. Okay. Do you know when you will play again in a match?
Oh no, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. And what does playing sports make you happy?
You get play with the other teammates.
Okay. And like, doesn't it make you tired and sweaty, that kind of thing?
Yeah, makes you
Yeah,
tired.
and that feels good.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
you? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. I like to run around too sometimes. By cycling,
Yeah.
like this is my thing. And for you, it's
Yeah,
basketball.
basketball.
And you also get to hang out with friends.
Yeah.
Right. I can see why you like it. Very cool. Okay, my last question here. What words of empowerment would you give to someone with similar disability?
Try to get a job
Okay, try and get a job.
and don't and do other stuff like go out and go meet some friends.
Meet some friends, play some sports.
Yeah, play some sports
Okay.
and do other activities together.
Okay, awesome. Earl, thank you very much for joining us
Okay.
today. And folks, thank you for joining us in another episode of ShareNet. Today we covered the topic of intellectual disability, and we will be back again next week. Thank you very much for joining. Bye now. You can say bye as well.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.